Hi guys, Grant J here and welcome to another one of our videos. In today's video we'll be discussing the new Opus IX cards for the water element. Do note that we'll be talking about these cards in a constructed sense, not in a sealed or draft sense. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So the first card we'll be looking at is Adele 8. She's a 5 cost 9k forward, category 8. Her job is Witch. If you don't control a forward other than Adele, Adele gains plus 1000 power, and when Adele attacks, you may discard one card. When you do so, choose one forward opponent controls, return it to its owner's hand. So this is a pretty slow, conditional, and expensive effect attached to a 5 CP 9k body, which is kind of what you expect. But her effect is really kind of weak and not really good enough for constructed play. So in limited and in sealed, yes, this card does have its use. It's actually pretty good. But when it comes to constructed, she's really slow. First of all, your opponent has to let Adele live long enough for you to be able to attack with her. So I've said this a lot during this set review. But basically, any forward that have like on attack triggers, those are the slowest triggers in the game. So basically, you have to allow them to come back to your turn, and then you have to be able to swing uninterrupted as well. And you have to be in a situation where you want to swing. So basically, a lot of the times it's going to be very difficult to trigger these effects. And when you do so, you can bounce opponents forward, but you have to discard a card as well. So unfortunately, it isn't a free effect, and it is a expensive effect as well. On top of that, bounce isn't a particularly good effect in the current metagame, just because so many forwards are played for their enter play abilities. So basically, you allow them to return the forward back to hand to play them again for a massive power. So overall, this card isn't particularly good. Yes, it becomes 5 CP 10k if you have no other forwards on the field. But also do note that when you have other forwards on the field, she doesn't gain that ability to bounce forwards as well. So that's another restriction of this card. So overall, there's just kind of a lot of restrictions on this card, and its ability isn't really that worthwhile. Even though it's category 8, it doesn't really help it out that much. Yes, I guess you can build Ice Water category 8, but I feel that Ice Fire category 8 is probably going to be a little bit better if you do decide to go down category 8. So overall, this card is just pretty weak and not particularly good in my opinion. Next card is Ultimecia. She is a 4 CP backup. She's also from category 8. Her job is Witch. When Ultimecia enters the field, each player reveals the top card of his or her deck. Each player who reveals a character card may play it onto the field. Also, for Water to Dull, put Ultimecia into Breakstone. Choose one forward, put it on top of its owner's deck. So this card is pretty much a complete gamble. So basically, yeah, you and your opponent both get the same effect, and you both reveal a top card. And because you effectively pay for Ultimecia, you kind of need to be 2 CP ahead to really sort of gain advantage out of Ultimecia. Otherwise, your opponent gets a free character, even if you and your opponent both play a card of the exact same cost. Because you put Ultimecia in play and you have to pay 4 CP for Ultimecia, you've kind of set yourself behind because your opponent's just gotten a free forward as well. So in order to really consider this card as playable, you need to have some sort of cards that can either stack your deck or allow you to check the top card of your deck. That being said, though, there may be situations where even if you do get a good card, your opponent might get a better card as well. So do note that. So there is a lot of like gamble to this card, and because of that, it's not really consistent enough to see play in a competitive sense. Yes, I guess you can build a sort of gimmicky deck that can take use of it, but even then, it doesn't seem to be that great. As for her second ability, paying effectively 4 CP Dull Break is not that cheap to put a forward on top of your opponent's deck. Yes, you aren't putting it back to their hand, so effectively you've removed the card and you've affected their next draw. But there are some restrictions to this as well. So if you do happen to bounce an opponent's card that has EX Burst back on top of their deck, it means that it really restricts your ability to attack that turn, simply because you'll be putting it into damage zone and they'll be triggering off an EX burst as well. So that is a limitation. Do note you can do it on one of your own forwards. If you do want to trigger one of your forwards' own like EX burst ability, I guess that's a thing. But paying effectively 5 CP and breaking it back up is kind of expensive to do so. So overall, the biggest restriction of this card is just a little bit too expensive to do it. The fact that it's a Witch backup does kind of help it if you do want to play Seifer, because there are a couple of Seifers that do require you to have a Witch character on the field or search for Witch cards, so there is support for that 2 synergy. But other than that, I really don't see a point of playing this card in the game at the moment. Next, we have Eodolus. It's a 4 cost backup. It's category 15. It's Emperor. For Dull, put Eodolus into Break Zone. Choose one summon of cost 4 or less in your Break Zone. Cast without paying its cost. Remove that summon from the game after use instead of putting it into the Break Zone. So effectively, this is the Devout but for summons. So similar to Devout, it doesn't like element restrict you or color restrict you. So you can play elements outside of your color if you don't have the CP to play them. but also it allows you to play them during your opponent's turn. So I guess summons are cards that you can play during your opponent's turn, so it doesn't have the restriction that Devout has where you can only do it during your own turn as well. So there is some decent flexibility with this card. The fact that it's category 15 also helps it out a little bit, because there are a couple of category 15 cards within water, so potentially we will be looking at more of a earth water category 15 deck, so that's potential as well. Not only that, it allows like your water deck to play certain summons that do help out or do hedge against certain weaknesses of the element. So water doesn't really have ways to destroy backups, nor does it have particularly good AoE removal. So being able to put in Zalira or Hecaton Care into your deck, sacrificing it or discarding it for other cards, and then using Iodolos to play it from your break zone is actually pretty good. So overall, this card is actually pretty solid. It's not like an auto-include, and it's maybe like one of those tech cards, like maybe a 48 for 49th card that you want to put into your deck to allow you to have access to certain other cards as well. And the fact that it's 15 does mean it has a little bit of synergy, especially if you're playing the 2-cost EX Burst Noctis, you can get this into your hand as well. The next card we'll be talking about is the first water legendary of the set. It is Ultros. It is a 5-cost 9k, so it's on curve. It's category 6. When Ultros attacks, deals 2,000 damage and 1,000 more damage for each card named Ultros in your break zone to all forwards your opponent controls. When Ultros is put from the field into a break zone, you may pay water. When you do so, search for one card named Ultros and play it onto the field dull. So I think this card is pretty underwhelming. So I've said that pretty much the only good 5 CP water forwards are Lena, Gout, Cloud of Darkness. And I think that Ultros is probably a tier below them in my opinion. The first ability, again, it's another on-attack trigger. So on-attack triggers are extremely slow, and you only really will be able to play them when you're kind of ahead on field, or if your opponent hasn't removed your forward. So you're not going to be able to rely on that too much. That being said, though, Ultros is a bit of a sticky forward in that when he is sent to the break zone, you can pay effectively one card or like 2 water CP to bring another one from your deck onto the field, even though it's in dull position. So obviously the more time Ultros dies, the stronger he becomes. So yeah, he'll be able to deal potentially 4k damage to your opponent's entire board if you can manage to get the 2 other Ultros into your bin towards the later part of the game. That being said, though, you do have to invest 5 CP to put this guy on the board initially, and if your opponent has some sort of abilities that either remove him from the game or prevent his ability from resolving, then you've really kind of like wrecked yourself, because you've committed so much to a forward that effectively didn't really do anything as well. So in certain matchups, I could see this card potentially being alright. But in certain matchups where if your opponent is able to deal with it effectively, then yeah, it's going to be pretty weak, and I think you've committed a little bit too much for a forward that doesn't really do too much. So overall, this card is potentially alright, but yeah, like, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely a tier below Lena or Cloud of Darkness in my opinion. So cards that do want to play this, or decks that do want to play this, are definitely going to be a tier lower than like your competitive tier decks. Next, we have Gout. She is a 2 CP forward at 5k power. Her category is category 6. She is Wild Child. If you control a monster, Gout gains plus 2,000 power. If you control 3 or more monsters, Gout gains Brave. So for a 2 CP 7k, that's pretty easy to achieve that power threshold. That's actually pretty good. Typically, we only see these sort of sized bodies in Earth, so water having something like this is actually pretty good. It gives you an alternative to playing Knight in a water deck, although definitely you do want to play like a decent amount of monsters in your deck in order to make sure this card resolves. Not only that, but you can also play her as just extra copies for your 5-cost Gout. So if you do want to play a more monster-orientated strategy, you can still play 3 copies of the 5-cost Gout, and this 2-cost Gout is a forward that you can play either in the early game when you only happen to have 1 monster, or towards the mid-game when your 5-cost Gout dies and this is an extra card. Not only that, it could also be used as your S fodder as well, so it can be used to discard for the 5-cost forward's S ability as well. So there's a lot of reasons to play this card. Ultimately, if you do play this card, you will be playing a more monster-orientated deck, and because like we're at a stage where monsters actually seem to be reasonably okay in the current metagame, and there's quite a lot of decent monsters, and usually because when you're putting monsters into play for free with a lot of card effects, you're usually not element restricted, so there's a lot of reasons to consider like a more monster-orientated strategy, and this Gout kind of fits into that pretty well. Next, we have Geese. Now, this is one of the more interesting cards for the set. He is a 4-cost AK forward. He's from category 12 and category Mobius. When Geese enters the field, all forwards opponent controls lose 1,000 power until the end of the turn. When Geese is dealt damage, you may remove Geese from the game. If you do so, return Geese onto the field. Dull, then remove the top 3 cards of the deck from the game. So basically, this card is ping resistant. So yeah, so if damage that is not lethal is dealt to him, you can remove him, put him back onto the field, and then you sacrifice the top 3 cards from your deck in order to do so. So it is a somewhat expensive effect, considering you are sacrificing 3 cards to do so, and especially in the current metagame where mill happens to be a part of the current metagame. But if you do ignore like mill being a win condition, this card's actually not terrible. Do note his first ability, that all your forwards losing 1000 power. This triggers every time he comes into play. So not only when he comes into play, like when you play him normally from your hand, but every time he returns back onto the field because of the damage that he's received or because of his second ability, then you're able to reduce your opponent's forward by 1000 power again. So in general, I don't think you'll really be able to do any board wipes with this card, but it just means that it's a card that's constantly going to be able to really affects your opponent's board and makes like damage and combat a little bit difficult for your opponent to deal with. And usually that 1000 power is usually enough to make sure some of your like mid-range cards are able to get over your opponent's mid-range cards as well. Do note there are certain cards that do synergize with this as well. So cards like Cactar, if you're able to deal 1000 damage to him with your own Cactar, you are able to remove him again, put him back on the field, and reduce your opponent's forwards by 1000 power. So there is some interesting synergy with that as well. That being said though, Water already has a card that's very similar in terms of its ability, in terms of Minwoo. So basically, Water's got this whole synergy of, yeah, if your forwards don't receive lethal damage, then you're able to prevent that damage or remove that damage. And there's a whole bunch of cards between Minwoo and Flintlock that can do similar things. So Geese's base ability of being able to remove himself, put him back into play when he receives non-lethal damage is kind of underwhelming or kind of not needed, especially if you're playing Water within your element, just because you have Minwoo available for a similar type effect on all your forwards as well. So because of that, I don't think that Geese really sort of adds that much to the water element, and because of that, I don't think he's really going to see all that much play. Next we have Gogo. It's a 3-cost 7k forward. It is category 6. His job is Mime. For pay 0, choose one forward opponent controls. Gogo gains his or her action abilities until the end of turn. You can only use this ability once per turn. So action abilities are payment type abilities, so the ones with the double ellipses or the 2 dots. This card overall is going to be very reliant upon your opponent's deck, so it's very opponent or very matchup specific. There's not a lot of cards in the current metagame that do have payment abilities, just because a large majority of them happen to be like enter play type cards. So Gogo in the current metagame is not particularly strong. So probably it's most useful in win type strategies because you do have access to your Stola and you do have access to Yuri if your opponent has them on the field. Against Ice Fire, you do have access to Laswell, even though it's not particularly great, and you won't be able to pay for it because you don't have access to Fire CP as well. So yeah, that's also something to note with Gogo, in that it only gains the action abilities, but if you don't have the elements to pay for them, you still can't use them as well. So that is a kind of major restriction to this card. So overall, because of that, this card is just a little bit too narrow. It's kind of cute, in that it can steal your opponent's payment abilities, but I think its ability is going to come up a little bit too narrowly for it to be sort of like main deck playable. Next we have White Mage. It is a 2-cost standard unit backup. When White Mage enters the field, you may pay Water. When you do so, if you do so, draw 1 card. So basically, this is the Water's 2/3 CP backup equivalent, and in this case, it's probably the most generic one possible, just because you draw a card, so you don't have to have any specific cards in your break zone. Paying 1 Water to draw a card is pretty standard for Water as well. Not only that, the fact that it's a standard unit means you can spam these guys out, so you aren't restricted by the number of these guys you can play. So if you are playing a Water deck where you just want to very consistently ramp, then this card is a pretty decent way to do so. That being said, the Water has a lot of 4 CP backups that can either draw you cards or filter your hand or do any number of things very similar to that as well, and all of them have backups such as Merlwhip and Gramps as well. So you are losing the fact that you have EX Burst, but you are gaining the potential to have it as a free CP backup instead. So overall, I think that the biggest issue with this card is that Water already just has a lot of cards that does what it needs, and because like aggression, especially early game aggression, is kind of pretty relevant in the current metagame, having EX Burst on as many cards as possible is also pretty relevant. So in general, I think you probably want to lean more towards the 4 CP EX Burst backup as opposed to this White Mage. And I think, yeah, simply because you have already a lot of cards within the Water element that already do such a similar ability, it's going to be really difficult to consider this card as in a spot for your deck. Next we have Successful. He is a 4-cost AK forward. He's category 4. He's job Paladin. If you control 2 or more category 4 forwards other than Successful, Successful gains plus 2,000 power and Brave. Pay 0. Choose one forward you control other than Successful. During this turn, the next time this forward would take damage reduced by 4,000 damage instead and deal Successful 4,000 damage. You can only use this ability once per turn. So basically, his payment ability basically allows him to shield another forward from a little bit of damage, or 4,000 of the next damage, and then deal 4,000 damage to Cecil instead. So this synergizes really well with Minwoo, because basically after the damage reduction, it's very unlikely that your forward is going to be receiving lethal damage, and at the same time, Successful doesn't really effectively take 4,000 damage because Minwoo prevents it as well. So overall, this basically allows you to prevent lethal damage to like any of your guys pretty easily if you have Minwoo available as well. Unfortunately, you can't use Cecil's ability to protect himself, so it's only a card used to protect other forwards. As for his first ability, gaining plus 2,000 power and brave, while it is good to get up to a 10,000 power brave forward, it's going to be very difficult to do so, simply because there's not that many category 4 forwards, especially within water itself. There are a couple of cards that you could potentially consider outside of water, such as the Yang Ursula pair, or the King and Queen of Emblem pair from Fire. But those forwards are just a little bit too weak in the current metagame, and you have to rely on them to being around in order for Cecil to sustain his 2,000 power and brave. That being said, though, the fact that Cecil can prevent damage to other forwards means that if your opponent doesn't have non-damage removal, then Cecil will be able to sustain his 2,000 power and brave. So there is like kind of synergy there. That being said, though, there's not a lot of category 4 cards that are in the current metagame, and the lack of a category 4 searcher really sort of hinders that as well. So overall, I do like this card. I think that there's definitely ways to play this in like combo orientated decks or more casual orientated decks. But in terms of like competitive play, this card is just a little bit underwhelming, or doesn't do enough by itself to really sort of justify it. Next, we have King of Concordia. It is a 2-cost backup. It's type 0. For Water Dull, put King of Concordia into the break zone, choose one forward you control, it gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. At the end of the turn, return it to its owner's hand. So it provides a basic 2k buff that also allows you to replay a forward, or to return a forward back to your hand at the end of the turn. So it's effectively a combination of Opus I Monk and Opus I Scholar, but kind of does them both worse. So generally when you monk one of your guys, you want it to be able to win combat, or to be able to survive some sort of damage ability, and you kind of want it to stick on the field. And with Scholar, you just want to bounce your forward back to your hand, either so you can play it again, or either to like dodge from your opponent's larger abilities. So King of Concordia like brings both the strengths and weaknesses of both cards, in that it gives you the buff of Monk, but it doesn't keep your forward around, and it bounces your forward, but it bounces it at the end of turn, so it doesn't allow you to like dodge abilities or dodge summons. So it's kind of like got the weaknesses of both cards, and because of that, it doesn't do either role particularly well. And also the fact that you can't choose your opponent's forwards kind of restricts this card. I don't even think it would have been like overpowered or particularly like particularly much of a nuisance if you could bounce your opponent's forwards even at Water Dull, because you are giving plus 2,000 power as well. So overall, like, I am not a fan of this card. But yeah, if you could choose opponent's forwards, then maybe. But as it currently is right now, I think it's kind of bad. Next, we have Bannon. It is a free CP4K forward, so it is below the curve. It is category 6. When Bannon is chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a backup, cancel all effects choosing Bannon. For Dull, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a forward, add it to your hand. So this actually creates a interesting draw engine for category 6, because we do have the Opus 4 Mog 4. Mog 6 that allowed you to draw cards, and it also protects itself if you have two other category forwards on the field as well. And Bannon also does effectively the same thing, that potentially allows you to draw a card as well every turn. And because Bannon is a little bit difficult to be chosen, and Mog 6 is difficult to choose if you have two, so you can create a bit of an engine if you can get them both on the field. Now, the two abilities of Bannon kind of synergize as well. So, The fact that if the top card of your deck is a backup, it prevents like all summons or abilities that target him. But you on resolution of the first ability, if the top card of your deck is a backup, then it cancels your opponent's summons or abilities. So you can always use your Dull ability or its tap ability to reveal top card of your deck and add it to your hand if it's forward in response. So your opponent uses some sort of ability to try to remove Bannon. In response, you Dull Bannon, uses ability. If it's a forward, you add it to your hand, which is great because you wouldn't have been able to cancel the summon or ability targeting him anyways. And then it gives you a slightly better chance of being able to block the ability or summon. So the two abilities synergize. You get like basically a second card or a second chance in order to try to protect Bannon. And then potentially you can also use Mughal 6 to draw additional cards to sort of like flip around the top card of your deck as well. Not to mention that there are quite a number of scry type effects within water, so abilities that allow you to look at the top card of your deck and rearrange them. So cards like Whale Zombie that you can sacrifice to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and to rearrange them, or cards such as a new Mughal Knight. These can all be used to rearrange the top card of your deck to ensure that you have like Bannon success on either drawing or on preventing abilities. So whilst this card's a little bit cute, I do think that there is like some pretty good scope for using this card in some like water, fire, or water, ice category 6 decks. Next card is Paladin. It is a 4 CP backup. It's FFTA2. It's a standard unit. When Paladin enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions. Choose one job standard unit in your break zone, add it to your hand, or until the end of the turn, all forwards you control gain plus 1000 power and brave. So effectively, this is a 2 CP backup because you are getting a card from it. So a lot of times, if you do play this in the early game, you can just make it a 2 CP backup. That being said, though, water also plays quite a number of standard units. So typically in your standard water deck, you are playing Vikings and you are playing Knights. So there will be quite a number of targets you'll be able to play with Paladin. That being said, though, water already has cards like Gladiator that you can break to put those standard units back into play. So Paladin doesn't really add that much into just a mono water strategy. So if you play it in a water, wind, or some other strategy, then potentially Paladin might be relevant. So I guess a large majority of these situations, you will be using it to return a job standard unit. But I guess in very specific situations where you do want to attack and you do want to have Brave, then you can do it as well to just give you guys plus 1k and Brave. So I think the best way to look at this card is that for a large majority of situations, if you happen to have stand units in your break zone, you can make this a 2 CP backup. And then in those situations where you want to be able to push, this card allows you to push as well. That being said, though, it's not a particularly cost-effective way to do it. So paying 4 CP to just like give all you guys plus 1k until the end of turn and Brave, not particularly fantastic. You do have access to your 1 cost Anthem backup that can give all you guys plus 1000 power permanently. So overall, this is maybe more relevant in a draw element type strategy or a more standard unit type strategy. But yeah, in mono waters, it's like kind of not good enough to sort of beat out the competition of existing backups. So I think this card is just probably a little bit too overcosted to make it good in the current metagame. Next is Famfrit. So it is a 6 cost summon. Each player selects up to 2 forwards or monsters he or she controls. Brackets select as many as possible, put them into the break zone. So basically what this says is both players sacrifices as many forwards or monsters they control, up to 2, right? So if your opponent has 2, he must select 2, and if you have 2, you must select 2 as well. So the real strength of this card is very similar to the Opus III Famfrit, is that if you have no monsters or forwards on the field and your opponent has 2, then you're able to basically force your opponent to sacrifice 2 of their guys without sacrificing any of your own. So when you consider the fact that you are able to just like force your opponent to like sacrifice 2 guys when you don't have any things on the board, it's actually pretty good. Not only that, if you combine it with a very often played water backup in the form of Yuna, you do reduce its cost from 6 to 5, which makes it significantly better. So being able to reduce cards from 6 to 5 is probably one of the most important thresholds in the game. Simply because if you're playing a 6 cost card, you're always going to have to discard a card from your hand in order to do so. Whereas if you reduce a card's cost, or if a card is costed 5, then you can just tap all your 5 backups in order to do so as well. So Unit just makes this card significantly more playable. You pretty much wouldn't want to play this 6 cost Famfrit in any deck without Yuna. So pretty much like that's my opinion. And this card is really, really quite good. And in combination with another monstrous card in the later part of Water Element, this card just gets really stupid. And that is Poram. So Poram basically allows you to continuously return this card to your hand and just continuously remove your opponent's stuff. And in combination with Yuna, you do it very, very cost efficiently as well. Not only that, this is one of the few ways that Water now has access to remove monsters. So previously, Water had a real bit difficult time in destroying monsters. Yes, they could bounce it with certain summons, but now they actually have ways to permanently remove monsters as well. So overall, this card is really fantastic. And if you guys have been tuning into any recent competitive play, this card has been a monster in competitive play. Next, we have the second water summon of the set. It's Choo Choo Lane the Impure. So it's a 1 cost EX burst summon. Choose one forward to lose all abilities until the end of turn, draw 1 card. So this is a really, really cheap way to remove abilities from your opponent's card. So it is a 1 cost card. So you can just play it from 1 easy water backup. Also draws your card as well. So effectively, you're not really wasting a card in order to do so. And it's also EX burst. So like it just ticks so many boxes. That being said, though, it doesn't really stop forwards from actually hitting you. It doesn't remove forwards, but like its main value is dealing with forwards that have ongoing abilities or having forwards that have like enter break zone type abilities. It effectively removes them as well. So effectively, if you had a way to deal with, say, your opponent's Veritas, you can just like pay the extra 1 water CP, remove Veritas' ability, and then when you destroy it, you don't have to sacrifice one of your cards. So it's a pretty good trade-off in that regard. Also, yeah, the fact that it's EX burst is good. And yeah, I think that pretty much just makes Halicarnassus unplayable, simply because whatever slot that you would have played Halicarnassus in, you're probably going to be replacing with Choo-Choo Lane as well. So overall, this card is really quite strong. Halicarnassus does have the advantage of it shuts down your opponent's abilities until the end of turn, so you can do it preemptively. So you can do it at the start of a combat in order to prevent your opponent from being able to do certain abilities like midway through combat or whatnot. And the fact that Halicarnassus is a body, but if you don't necessarily need the body, then Choo-Choo Lane is just going to be better, and it's going to be able to surprise your opponent in certain situations as well. So overall, I do like this card. It's going to be very difficult to select which summons you want to have available in your deck, but this is definitely a card that I would seriously consider in a lot of decks that do have access to water. Next, we have Poram, the monster of a card from this set. So it's a 2-cost 2k forward, so it is below the curve. It is category 4, not that it really makes much of a difference. EX burst: when Poram is put from the field into a break zone, choose one summon in your break zone and add it to your hand. This card is absolutely stupid. So typically with a card like this, we probably should have expected it to be free CP, but the fact that it's a 2 CP forward that gets you back 2 CP worth of value means that it effectively becomes cost neutral. And being able to recycle any summon in your break zone, it doesn't even have to be element restricted as well, makes it stupidly good. You can like play in a whole bunch of decks to like, yeah, recur like really strong summons. And not only that, it's EX burst as well. So if you do receive this damage, you can just like pick up a summon. So this card is stupidly good. And being able to recur cards like Fanfrit, being able to recur cards such as Diablos or Valor is just superly good, and it's really what's going to make Windwater like a even bigger monster for this upcoming set. And in my opinion, this card is probably like overpowered. So in my opinion, I think we should probably expect either Poram or Fanfrit to be banned before World Championships this year, just because it's too cheap, it's too broad, and it's EX burst as well. If you're playing water, pretty much this card is like an instant free of, I think, in pretty much any water deck, in my opinion. Next, we have Mughal 12. It's a free cost 7k, so it's on curve. It's category 12 and a standard unit. When Mughal 12 attacks or blocks, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, return these to the top or bottom of your deck in order. So basically, this card doesn't inherently get you any sort of card advantage, but allows you to scry free and basically allows you to stack the top cards of your deck however you like. Now, this by itself isn't particularly amazing, but the fact that water has a lot of cards that have EX burst, in combination with water often playing for Sawyer, it actually makes a very good synergy. So basically, yeah, this Mughal can allow you to, on attack or on block, rearrange top cards, and then it allows you to force a EX burst to the top of your deck, and then you can Fusoya, dealing 7k and also getting an EX burst as well. So this card is extremely good. Unlike a lot of the standard units that have triggers, this one triggers on both attack and block, so you don't necessarily have to wait for it to attack in order to get its ability. So if you put it down and your opponent's attacking you, you can always block with the Mughal 12. You don't have to necessarily let the combat resolve. So you block, even if he's blocking like an 8k or a 9k, he will trigger off his ability. You can stack the top card of your deck, and maybe you can stack either a Fanfrit or a Choo-Choo Lane or something on top of your deck, or a Leviathan. You can then use Fusoya, deal 7k to the attacker, and then use the EX burst to finish it off as well. So Mughal 12 doesn't necessarily have to die in combat when it blocks, because you can use Fusoya to subsequently like kill off whoever he's blocking again. And then yeah, again, if your opponent attempts to attack again, then you can like effectively block again with Mughal 12 or whatnot. So yeah, this card by itself is just like a very tactical card. It's not going to necessarily deal like, yeah, it's not going to like necessarily give you a whole bunch of advantage, but it combines with so many war cards effectively very well. Not only that, yeah, if he blocks and you do like sacrifice him, it allows you to effectively filter through your draws for your next turn as well. So there's a lot of versatility to this card. Yeah, like I think that this card is very playable in a casual or local sense. Probably a little bit better than that. It's probably tier 1.5. Like it's probably tier 1.5 considerable. Probably not good enough just because like the bar for tier 1 competitiveness is so high. But overall, I do like this card and I think it's quite good. Next, we have Mog 6. So we talked about the Opus 4 Mog 6 a little bit earlier in this video, and now we have the Opus 9 Mog 6. It's a free cost 4k forward, so it is below the curve. It is category 6. When Mog 6 enters the field, draw 2 cards. When Mog 6 leave the field, discard 2 cards from your hand. It's also got an S ability, so S, Water, Dull. Choose one forward, reveal the top card of your deck. If the revealed card CP is an even number, return the chosen forward to its owner's hand, and add the revealed card to your hand. If the revealed card CP cost is an odd card, deal the chosen forward 4,000 damage, dull it and freeze it, and add the revealed card to your hand. So, in my opinion, you probably want to, in a lot of cases, have an odd card on the top of your deck when you want to reveal for Dusk Requiem. Just simply because, like I've said, like bouncing cards isn't particularly good in the current metagame. That being said, though, you do draw a card irrespective, so that's pretty good. And you are basically you are dealing with one of their forwards, so it's actually not bad. Yeah, it's not bad. The more important thing about this card, though, is its enter play ability. So, usually when you have cards that like draw you cards when they enter play, they usually have a higher cost to sort of justify it. But this card sort of gets around that by having a leave play ability by forcing you to discard 2 cards from your hand. Now, the thing is that if you draw your cards upon entry, and if you use up all your cards when before Mog 6 leaves the field, then you actually don't discard any cards. So you can like play Mog 6, draw 2 cards, and then like use those cards, discard them to play backups or whatever. And then if Mog 6 dies at that point, you actually have no cards in your hands to sacrifice, so you basically come out ahead. So that's the one real strength about this card, is the fact that you get to have cards now, and you don't necessarily have to like sacrifice those cards later on, because if you have no cards when it does so, then yeah, you don't discard cards from your hand. Also, Water does have access to a new Choo-Choo Lane, which does choose a forward and lose all abilities, which can make this Mog lose all its abilities. So it does get its interplay ability, and then if you use Choo-Choo Lane to remove its ability, then when it does die, you don't discard 2 cards from your hand. And also, Choo-Choo Lane didn't cost you any cards as well, so it's actually not bad in that regard. So if you consider Mog 6 and Choo-Choo Lane as like a 4 CP package, then basically you paid 4 to draw 2 cards, put a 4k body on the field, and yeah. And so basically it's not bad when you take all of that in consideration. So yeah, there's probably some potential crazy deck that can just like cycle a shit ton of cards in the near future that's going to be created because of this card. So definitely I think that this is one of those cards to look out for in the near future. Next we have Marlborough. He is a free cost 6k forward. He is a monster. During your turn, Marlborough is also a forward with 6,000 power. When Marlborough is blocked, all forwards and opponent controls lose 2,000 power until the end of turn. So this card is probably a little bit too expensive to be like competitive playable. The fact that it's free cost makes it a little bit more difficult to remove, simply because a lot of monster removal happens to the target 2 or lessers. But at the same time, it makes it too expensive to be cheated in. So you don't have access to cards like Gout or Sid Waffbot that can put it into play. The best you got is Fisher, and you are paying a lot of CP in order to use Fisher to put it back into play. On top of that, it has to be blocked in order to reduce all your opponent's guys by 2,000 power. So I guess on one hand, it makes it really annoying for your opponent to block this card. But then at the same time, this card can't block either, so you can't use it for defense either. And that kind of makes you consider, whether you'd want to play the other free cost Marlborough instead, which can be used on offense and defense and is a monster until you want to transform it. That being said, this card does have the advantage of, it's always a monster during your opponent's turn. So yeah, either way, both your monsters are going to be unchoosable by your opponent's stuff during your turn. But that being said, though, I'm not a huge fan of this card. I think it's a little bit too expensive, and I think that there are easier ways to reduce your opponent's forward's power in Water. Next, we have Laza. It is a 2-cost water backup. It is category 12. For dull, negate all damage dealt to all forwards you control. So to clarify this backup, it doesn't prevent any damage. It just removes all damage that your forwards currently have on them. So yeah, when it says negate, it doesn't prevent any damage that's incoming. So this card is like very similar to Flintlock, in that Flintlock makes it so you guys don't receive non-lethal damage, whereas Laza removes all non-lethal damage on your forwards at the moment. That being said, though, both these cards can be replaced by Minwoo, which basically just makes them not receive minor pings of damage or like non-lethal damage anyways, like permanently, right? So in any case, you pretty much want to have Minwoo like a large majority of the time than either of these cards. Now, the one reason why you would consider playing this card is that it is a 2 CP backup named Laza. So we did have a card back in Opus 2 called Drace that was a free CP 6k, so it's a little bit undercurve. But if you happen to have Laza on the field, he reduces cost and also gains plus 2,000 power and first strike. So it becomes a 1 CP 8k first strike. And when you take that into consideration, yeah, maybe like this card is playable. There's a reason why you'd play Laza. Obviously not really for his ability, but the fact that he's named Laza and you can get a like really cheap, decently sized Drace. But other than that, I probably wouldn't consider this card for any sort of competitive play. And finally, we have the second war legendary of the set. We have Rosa. She is a free cost 7k forward, so that's on curve. She's category 4 and a white mage. If a forward you control is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 1000 damage instead. When Rosa forms a party and attacks, activate Rosa. Rosa can attack once more this turn. And her S ability is Pray S. Reveal top card of your deck. If it is a water card, activate all forwards you control. So she has 3 different abilities, and let's go through these one at a time. So the first ability, reducing all damage dealt to all your forwards by 1k, is not terrible, but it's not particularly amazing either. Pretty much, yeah, this will be combined with cards like Minwu or other similar sort of prevention type abilities to make the threshold of your forwards dying a little bit higher, so that there is a minor plus about that. But yeah, so it's not particularly strong because it's not giving a particularly large prevention bonus to your forwards. As for the party attack strategy, this is going to require a very specific deck in order to make use of. So I believe from the way that this ability is worded, when it forms a party attacks, it activates an attack. It can attack once more again that turn. I think as long as she keeps party attacking, she can continually participate in party attacks. So she can attack multiple times a turn, and then subsequently on the last time she can attack by herself as well. So this card basically allows you to just pump a whole bunch of party attacks through. That being said though, if your opponent happens to have a guy that's bigger than Rosa, then they can just block the party and just kill Rosa on the first party attack. So I don't really see the point of making Rosa party attack multiple times. That being said though, there were 2 backups from Opus 5 that might be synergistical enough to make this a playable card. Andoria, which is a 2 CP backup when a party you control deals damage to your opponent, draw a card. And Celestia, when a party you control attacks, all forwards in that party gain plus 1000 power until the end turn. So if you do get into the optimal situation where you have both those 2 CP backups on the field and you have some other water forwards on the field that you can party attack with Rosa, you can just pump Rosa up every party attack. Because yeah, the buff of Celestia stays until the end of the turn, right? So Rosa attacks for the first time, gets plus 1000 power, and then if your opponent blocks or whatever, then Rosa can party attack with another guy and get another pump. So basically, on Rosa's final attack, she could probably be 9 or 10,000 power pretty easily. But yeah, that's in a very, very specific strategy and very, very specific deck. Yeah, and outside that, I don't think that it's going to be too relevant. As for her S ability Prey, it's kind of weak. Yeah, if you reveal top card of the deck and it's water, you get to activate all forwards. You did have to discard a card in order to do that. And it pretty much means that you can only play it in mono water. I don't think you even really needed the drawback of having to reveal top card as water. Yeah, but simply just discarding S to activate all you guys probably would have been fine. It's not a very overbearing or overpowered S ability, even at its S cost. So yeah, overall, I don't think it's particularly good. Definitely, in certain matchups, it can help you out a lot, primarily in Ice. But other than that, this card it has a whole lot of, very niche type abilities that require build arounds. And, I don't think you can niche all these different types of abilities in the same deck. So that's what I think really sort of restricts this card. So overall, I think this card has potential, and I think that there are some fun decks and strategies you can build with this. I'm definitely interested in tinkering around with this a couple of weeks down the track. But yeah, so overall, I think that this card is okay, but it's going to be probably on the same tier as Legendary Barts, or say Legendary Luso, just cards that aren't kind of good enough by themselves because they're independently not good enough, but have some very unique, interesting combo decks that you can build with them. And that's it, guys. So, were there any cards in this video that you think I might have overrated or underrated? If there's any strategies that you think I might not have touched upon or any sort of ideas that I might not have really sort of explored, do let me know in the comment section down below and we can discuss and chat and really sort of delve deeper in some of these ideas. So, if you guys enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe. And until next time, Grand J out.